The point is I think that confidence, but integrity and backing up your knowledge with fact is really, really important. One of the things from a services procurement and a staffing perspective that clients are reliant on is good quality data.
Yeah.
Rate data and benchmarks. I can't tell you, and I know a number of these, of organisations that are creating and running with what they'll call dynamic or real-time rate cards, but they're using outdated data. It's not up to date. So they're creating a narrative for a customer that is not true. They have a max, medium and low bill rate card methodology that's built in and built on redundant data. So how can you trust that? You know, that's a really frustrating position from an industry perspective to be in, because then if you are in an active, commercial, competitive position with a new service and you're coming in with actual real-time rate data, the client is going to see a massive delta between that and go, well, no, we've got this rate card data from our incumbent that we've been working with for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, and what you've given us is really different. So I think this piece around data integrity, honesty and truth is also really important. And I'm not saying that people are actively or proactively not being honest or leading with integrity. I just think there is a lack of integrity in the data, in the process, in the systems. On the client side too, you know, how many clients come to market for 500 million, you know, US dollars or euros or pounds of spend under management, you go live with them and it's 122. Did they actively come to market with an untruth, or is it just a lack of integrity in the data? I'd like to believe it's not an untruth. I'd like to believe it's a lack of integrity in the data.
Yeah, and this idea of coming to market with maybe gaps in the information and gaps in the data is definitely something that applies to services procurement, in the sense that what I was saying earlier about discovery, problem discovery, it's even more important in services procurement because it's an area that people haven't generally addressed effectively ever.
Yeah.
And so the gaps in knowledge internally are potentially quite large to start with. And that's where getting those conversations of understanding, what does the current process look like? I know you've got a burning pain and it's that you can't see it, or that there's this misclassification risk, or that everything overruns, or that there's an overspend, or whatever it might be. But getting to that's why it's so important to have those discovery conversations with organisations to help them really get a better understanding of their own problem first. And I think, you know, things like going and being able to do discovery audits and, you know, evaluating maturity and all that sort of thing, it does have its place, but allowing that organisation to bring in the right people, not in a environment where they're being sold to, but in an environment where it's like a discovery of like, what does the problem even look like?
Yeah.
Like from a technology provider, we're not necessarily going to be the right fit for every problem. We'd rather understand the problem properly in the first place to see if we are the best fit for it or not. But I think it's the services procurement side of it, where MSPs are, the MSP world is expanding their remit to take this on. And I see it in this kind of journey towards total workforce management, really, because it's like you have to have all the bits under control to be able to do proper, I'm going to say it again, workforce orchestration or work orchestration or, you know, strategic workforce planning, whatever you want to call it. You've got to have everything under control. You've got to be able to see all the data to bring it together and actually take that top level view. The risk is it's just another opportunity for people to come in and overcomplicate it and buzzword bingo the living daylights out of it.
Yeah.
So I guess
acronyms.
Yeah, acronyms.
Let's create some more acronym hell.
There's a lot of acronyms in the market. So just interested in your opinion on that from a services procurement point of view, just in terms of trying to simplify it. And I know that partly comes down to the expertise.
It does come down to the expertise. I think it comes down to the MSPs recognising that services procurement is not a natural evolution from staff org, right? And I think MSPs traditionally have basically had people with recruiting and temp staffing and MSP contingent backgrounds then evolve into services procurement experts. Very few of them, I think, carry that particularly well. No offence to anybody, because it is very different. You're talking to stakeholders in a different way about different things. You're negotiating with suppliers that are delivering outcomes. This is where this kind of blend between staffing providers and SOW delivery outcomes, I think that's where there's this kind of, let's call it a pickle.
Yeah,
right,
some grey areas.
It is. But yeah, look, you're right. I think to get to a fully orchestrated, I've said it now, platform that delivers true total talent management is the nirvana. Very few organisations, probably count globally 5 organisations that have really done it and done it well. I think some are on a journey to get there, but the pulling in of all of the stakeholders within a customer environment to adopt and support that is really difficult because it comes down to ownership. Who owns this? And the traditional MSP has been, as we've already acknowledged, commoditized as part of a staffing story, which doesn't necessarily carry the brand equity or advisory equity in an organisation. Where I see the MSPs today is not divorcing and not disrespecting the staffing organisations, but moving further up the value chain to be recognised as an advisor. And I think the more and more we see services procurement and outcome-based projects coming under the management of an MSP organisation, the more we have to simplify the conversation, make the buying experience really easy for the organisation. We also have to respect that for some procurement departments and strategic sourcing departments that have been built on this need to manage spend in a particular way by category and so on and so on, there's a mindset of like, why would I have an MSP do that work for me? That's my job. That's the job of my teams. Why would I ask them to do it? It's not their job. That's not what they do, because the MSPs are in this bucket of staffing provision, when actually most of what MSPs, there's a couple of us, managing more SOW spend than staff org spend. And I think that's going to continue. So is it about, again, that kind of honest conversation and simplifying the conversation of roles and responsibilities and value for an organisation? We're not trying to replace procurement. We're not trying to replace sourcing. What we're trying to do is be an extension in taking what could be classified as the lower value tail spend work so that you can focus more on your strategic supply chain. Organisations that can bucket that strategic supply chain and put more focus there and then outsource all of that long tail, high volume, repetitive work to the MSP, they see real value in that, because the work that can be done from a full end-to-end processing perspective can be done, whereas in most client organisations, it's not done to the full extent of the process. Therefore, cost, security, onboarding, offboarding, hardware management is not done at the level that they require in their organisations. And we see that. And that's not a criticism, by the way. It's just how it happens.
There's no way they can handle the volume. It's, I think depends where it sits within the organisation, but the amount of conversations I and my colleagues have had with procurement professionals that just look at whether it's tail spend or a particular category and just say that there's literally no way we can manage that, because there's so many statements of work going through. To manage that in a kind of manual process where it's a scan signed PDF in a document repository somewhere, nothing's digitised within a system. We've got no visibility below a purchase order level. There's absolutely no way they can stay on top of that. And they're just reliant on the buying managers or engagement managers doing things the right way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't do the buying managers any favours. And typically the process will slow them down, so they'll try and go around it. And it actually doesn't do the supply chain any favours really either, because they might get blamed for overruns or extensions, where actually if you audited that effectively, digitally, you could look back on it or see it in real time that's because one of the business stakeholders was on holiday, or it wasn't scoped correctly in the first place, or something's changed. So I think just transparency all the way through is critical to it. But it's an area where, as we were talking about, with the complexity of hiring contingent workers, there's lots of moving parts and lots of things going on. Exactly the same with services procurement. It's a different problem. And it requires that different expertise level to be able to communicate with the right people within the end organisation and the supply chain and manage different problem set. But it's really complicated. Again, where a technology-enabled service can provide massive value to an organisation if it's not something that they can genuinely do themselves. So I think it's interesting to see how these things can be simplified and how they can be addressed. But as you say, it's not necessarily been the traditional remit of the staffing industry or the MSP area. And I've constantly found it frustrating as discussions in the industry just haven't seemed to move on. But they really are starting to move on now, because you've got some really smart stakeholders within end client organisations that are starting to communicate with each other more. You've got MSPs that are really starting to lead the charge in this area. In some cases, people are bringing in expertise. And I know this is something you mentioned David Orme earlier. I've had some really interesting conversations with David about his time at Cox Communications. He's been there and done it. And so that is levelling up the value of the conversation that's going on here, where if you genuinely ask these organisations, have you got the capacity to manage it? If they haven't, great. There's a really interesting conversation to be had there. If they have got the capacity to manage it, are they sure? Because at the moment, does it look like they are, or does it look like they aren't?
Yeah.
But it's all down to that discovery. And I think it's a really worthwhile conversation where it's taken from this point of view of, what does the problem look like in your particular organisation? How are you trying to marshal all of your resources, and what's going to help you compete effectively in the market? And I think the value that you can put on that at a very top level is, it's incredible, the amount of value that there is entailed. It's everything about what the business should be focusing on.
It is, and also from my perspective, I'm never asking my business to go into this with a view of just adding, right? It's about solving for a problem. There's a value piece here, and it's integrity-based, of working with customers to solve problems, improve the buying experience within their ecosystem, make sure that they're not going to suffer a classification issue because of putting robustness into the process, and giving them the right resources that work with the right teams. When I was working with David, when he was a customer, our team was an extension of his team, and they were very much seen as an extension. That's where the native piece comes in, right? Where people forget who they work for. You could see that as a great success when your outsourced third-party MSP becomes seen as an integral part of your own branded sourcing function. This is about taking leverage, taking work away from people that could be doing higher value work in their own organisations. And I say that really carefully, because then I don't want to devalue the work that can be done in the long tail. I don't want to devalue the work that gets done, in some of our offshore centres. It's not devaluing the work, it's just saying we've opted to put work in different places, or with a third party, or with an MSP, so that we can focus on higher value, higher impact, more complex, more strategic work for our organisation. And I think the more customers start working with us on the services procurement side, they start seeing that benefit. Like, oh yeah, I've got more time to focus on these areas now, which might be more interesting to them, might be more impactful, might have more strategy aligned to them, and also change the way in which they sit around a table with their own organisation, which I think is great.